You're listening to Food Psych, a podcast about nutrition, eating disorders, and body image. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in health at every size. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships to food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beef, and now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 68. I'm so excited about today's episode for a couple of reasons. The first is that we have an amazing guest who I am sure many of you may know from her podcast. She has a podcast of her own called Fearless Rebel Radio. She is a body image coach and total body positive badass. And I'm speaking, of course, about Summer Innanen. So we have been talking for a while about trying to make this happen, and we finally got it together to record. So I have an episode with her this week, and I'm going to be on her podcast sometime soon as well. So I'm super, super excited because we have so much in common and just had such a great conversation about how she got to where she is and really developed positive body image after years of struggling. Can't wait to share that with you in just a moment. And I'm also going to have links to her new program in the show notes for this episode. The second reason I'm really excited about today's episode is that it's actually our season 3 finale. So it's such a great one to stand as the season finale because I think it encapsulates so much of the great energy that we've had in this season around body positivity and health at every size, and intuitive eating kind of encapsulates what I've been going for the whole season of the podcast. And as some of you may know who've been listening for a long time, I've sort of had different themes each season so far. But really good news is that season 3 has been by far the fan favorite. I've gotten so much great feedback about this health at every size and body positive content. And that's really where my heart is at these days too. That's what I feel is my mission in life, is to sort of spread this message and help bring body positivity and health at every size and intuitive eating to everyone, no matter where they are in their journey. If you're recovering from an eating disorder or from years of dieting and body shame, so many people need this message. So in season 4, which is premiering on September 13th, I will be doing the exact same theme. It's going to be all about health at every size, body positivity, and intuitive eating. So if you've been digging this season, you'll definitely want to tune back in season 4, and that premieres again on September 13th. And I'll just be on vacation for a couple weeks, so don't panic if you don't see any new episodes. Just taking a little break, and then I'll be back with more of this great stuff. But meanwhile, since I will be on a break, I wanted to give you guys a heads up right now that I'm going to be doing a special Labor Day sale of my 13-week online course and my Food Psych Premium bonus membership. So basically, it's going to be a package deal with the Food Psych Premium membership and the 13-week online course for a really significant discount. And it's just going to be for Labor Day weekend. So Friday to Monday of Labor Day weekend, I'm going to be giving out the promo code exclusively to the folks on my email VIP list. So if you guys haven't signed up already for that, definitely do so, because this promo is only going to be available through the VIP list. So head over to christyharrison.com/email to sign up. And if you've already signed up for my list, then great. Just keep an eye on your inbox a little bit before Labor Day and I'll send you the deets. So again, if you haven't signed up yet, definitely do so, christyharrison.com/email. And that's also a great place to get weekly tips on body positivity and intuitive eating. I also send out updates when I have a new episode of the podcast or a brand new Refinery 29 column out. So I just started doing this column for Refinery 29 called How to Eat, which is all about intuitive eating and body positive nutrition. So definitely check it out. You can get on my email list, and that's sort of the easiest way to stay up to date with that. And then you can also send me your questions there, because once I start sending you emails, you'll also have my email address. So that is it for the announcements, and I'm so excited now to bring you this season 3 finale conversation with Summer Innanen, the fabulous body image coach, and I spoke with her via Skype from her home in Vancouver, Canada. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
Yeah, well, there was an interesting dichotomy with my relationship with food growing up. I guess just as a precursor to that, I had a really normal childhood otherwise. I had a really good family life. We were middle class. I went to a private school. We went to Disney World on vacation. Like, I had a pretty privileged upbringing, and my family was, we were like a nuclear family. It was very loving, but there was definitely some things that contributed to the way that my relationship with food and the relationship with my body unfolded as I got older. And so the interesting dichotomy was that my grandmother, who is my mother's mother, she was Italian. And so my grandmother had a huge influence on the way that my mother fed us and the food that was served in our family setting. So I grew up in this environment where food was love, and there was always so much food. So I would go to my grandmother's house for dinner or, for lunch on a Sunday or something. And, it was always like freshly prepared pasta with this sauce that had been simmering for hours, with the beef that was, pulled off the bone. Like, I can taste it talking about it. I'm actually like thinking to myself, I need to go and make some of this for myself. Yeah, it was so delicious, and there was always so much food, and there's always these Italian desserts, and it was a big spread. And then, my brother and I have an older brother. He's 5 years older than me. We'd finish the big meal. We'd go into the living room and maybe flip on the TV, and then, my grandmother would come in 20 minutes later and say, "All right, who's ready for a sandwich?" So there was
wow.
quantity of food, the amount of food that you could eat was something that was celebrated. And that was their way. That was my grandmother's way. That was my mother's way. It's my mother's way to this day of showing love. Like, even when I go home for Christmas, it's ridiculous the amount of food that's there. Could probably feed a small country. I feel like my mom's got a little bit more crazy about it as she's gotten older as well.
Wow.
But there was always all this food. And then the flip side of this was that my mom was extremely health conscious and ahead of the time. So I grew up in the 80s, and my mom was already, buying most of our food at this like really hippie health food store that you had to drive, 15 minutes to get to. I wasn't allowed any sugar. So even things like Cheerios were off limit. That was an off limit food for me. So I had this weird contrast because it was, that there was the Italian side where quantity was really celebrated, and the amount of food you ate was like, oh yeah, look at you eating. But then, outside of that, inside my everyday life, my mom was like she was just very protective of us. And so she was trying to protect us in the way that she knew best possible. So for example, I was also the kid who had to put pure zinc on myself as a form of sunscreen. And this is like in the 80s, and nobody else was doing that. So, I mean, and thank God she did, because
right. The whole PABA thing.
Good thing to do, right? So she's kind of ahead of the times in terms of being really protective. But
how did she get that way? Did she read a lot and like work in the health field or anything like that?
No, I'm assuming she read it from somewhere. I don't know where. I don't know if it was, from the TV or from any kind of publication. She didn't work in the health field. She was a stay-at-home mom, so we were her focus. We were her job. And then, this story has a lot of my mom in it. So I want to be really careful with this, because my mom's such an incredible mom. So when I talk about this isn't to say she did anything wrong. This isn't to blame. Like, there's no resentment there. Yeah. I really want to stress how phenomenal my mom is. And she did everything for us. We were taken care of so well. But the food thing was interesting because my relationship with food really came from her, and the way that we were brought up had a big influence on the way mine developed. So she had this very health conscious side, but she was also a chronic dieter. And so, dieting was always ever present, in a subtle way in my upbringing, and I don't think I internalized that in any particular harmful way until I got older, when my mom championed some of my dieting behaviors when I was a teenager. another interesting piece of this story is that I mentioned we weren't allowed sugar, but we were allowed to eat whatever we wanted on certain occasions. And so, for example, on Halloween, we were allowed to go out and trick or treat and pick up as much candy as we wanted, but we were only allowed that night to eat it.
Oh my God.
Whatever we didn't eat, it was gone. Like that was it. My mom would put it out. So that, that is one example. Another example is my dad used to take us to, or take me to baseball games.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I would go, like I really could care less about baseball. The only reason I would go is because he would let me eat whatever I wanted. And so I would go, and he would basically spend the entire time going to the concession stand and back, bringing me a hot dog and caramel corn and, whatever it was, ice cream, whatever I wanted. And then by like the fourth inning, I was done. And so I would make him go home. So it was just, it's interesting because looking back, it was almost like this binge-like behavior, except I was too young I didn't have any guilt associated with it, but it was, I ate to a point of physical discomfort because I knew that the food wasn't going to be there anymore. And I just thought it was a cool, fun experience. So I wasn't consciously dieting because that's just the way that food was, but it certainly stripped away my ability to intuitively eat when I reflect back. And this cycle of, restrict and then, eat large quantities of food on weekends or special occasions had, pretty much became the story of my life. As I got older, and then as a dieter, it became more from a dieting perspective. But I would go to like my friends' houses and I would eat all the food that they had that I wasn't allowed to have. And there was this like good, bad food mentality that had been instilled in me from a very young age. But quantity of food was never an issue. So like I was never shamed or blamed or made to feel bad for eating a large quantity of food, because that came back to the Italian influence, and food was love. So eating was celebrated. So that was kind of an interesting dichotomy, and like the two sides of the equation of my relationship with food when I was a young child, and there was no emotion attached to it. It was just this lovely experience. And, as much as I complained about the fact that I wasn't allowed Cheerios, or that I had to bring this really strange sprouted wheat bread to school or to camp when my friends were, eating Wonder Bread, I complained about that, but there was never any association with it from, I guess, what I would consider now to be a diet mentality.
Right. So it wasn't connected to your weight or your body in any way. It was just about
not at that point.
Health.
Yeah, not at that point. And even, and I just thought my mom was kind of crazy. Like she made us, like she would make us take cod liver oil. Like it was all things that are actually, interestingly enough, have kind of shown their face again in the paleo movement nowadays. But she was doing this stuff in the early 80s. So it was like, it's just like definitely the strange one.
Really ahead of the curve. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so interesting what you say about like, you have no resentment and it's not her fault, because it really isn't, like I think sometimes parents feel really terrible and blame themselves for kids having disordered eating issues. But I think it's a larger thing than that, right? Like she was trying to do the best she could to take care of your guys' health, and, really like doing everything she could to make sure you were as healthy as possible based on what she knew at the time, but also had her own struggles with food, her own dieting issues. And it's like until we change society so that women don't think it's normal and preferable to diet, we're not going to be able to change those individual family relationships either, right?
It's so true. It's very, very true. I mean, she didn't know what she didn't know. And I actually, even now, I don't think she blames herself. She still thinks she did everything the best she could.
Oh,
so that's my mom. My mom owns her choices.
That's funny. But so that's really interesting. When do you think it shifted for you to be more about your body and your weight?
Yeah, well, I think layered on top of that is that I never really felt comfortable in my body. I wasn't larger bodied, but I wasn't skinny. And relative to the other kids, I skewed a little bit more towards the larger side. And again, this is relative to the other kids in my class. If you were to look at pictures of me, you would probably think, what is she talking about? But it's, you compare yourself to the people that are around you. And I was never athletic, and I was always one of the slowest in gym class, and I was more of a shy kid. I was pretty self-conscious. And my brother, again, I don't hold any resentment for him anymore. I did for a long time, but he teased me relentlessly for my body. He was such a dick. Like, there's no other way for me to say that other than he was so mean. And just, he teased me for my body, just not like, it was nonstop. And it was so upsetting for me. And other kids bullied me for my body too, all through school. Even through high school, people made fun of my body. So I really developed this sense of like, okay, there's something wrong with my body. And then there were a couple other incidences that happened that really reinforced that for me, at least that stand out as kind of like pivotal light bulb moments. One of those was, again, like, God bless my mom. She sent me to modeling camp when I was like, and oh my God, it's so funny. And so anyways, they told me that I needed to lose weight. I remember that being like a very shameful moment for me. There was another one where the only sport I actually did become good at was swimming, and particularly I did synchronized swimming for a couple years. But they tested our body fat, and again, that was one they said, your body fat is too high, whatever that means. But when you're like 11, 12 years old, that stuff just rocks your world. And so layer that upon, the already self-conscious feelings, the feelings that were there that I already felt ashamed of my body. When I started to feel like I needed to do something about it. And that was probably around the age of like 12 or 13 when I started to think about how I could try to change it. So I remember sitting on the floor of my bedroom and doing things like sit-ups and leg lifts and trying to kind of see if I could lose weight. I wasn't doing anything with food at that time. There was no real dieting behavior. That didn't start until high school. But that was when I started to think that attractiveness would make me feel better. And that was when, it really became apparent that I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted approval, which I think most teenagers do. That's pretty normal. But I was very self-conscious, low self-worth. And so the message to me was that the way my body shape was going to make me feel better about myself. That was going to protect me from people making fun of me. That was going to protect me from people making me feel ashamed. And so that was my first foray into starting to play around with that. And then high school was when it started to accelerate a little bit more.
How did you discover dieting or decide to try your first diet?
Yeah, so it's funny. Because my mom would take me to her Weight Watchers meetings, and not so sure I internalized that. Like, I don't think I wanted to mimic that or anything like that. But I did. There was this clear message that fat was bad and thin was good. That was a clear message throughout that I kind of picked up along the way, which also the media tells us.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid.
Yeah. The first thing that I really did was in high school in grade 9, for grade 9 biology, one of our assignments was we were learning about the human body. We were learning about carbohydrates and fat and protein in the body. And so one of our assignments was to track our calories and macronutrients.
What an assignment to give ninth graders. That's crazy.
It's really innocent at the time, but now I don't think they would. At least I would really hope they wouldn't do that. But that was when I looked at it, and I remember sharing it with my mom. And my mom said to me, if you want to lose weight, you have to eat X number of fat grams. I won't say. But that was, and so then I was like, all right, well, I'm going to do that. And so I cut out fat. Like, that was my first, low fat. All right, cut out the fat, like no more peanut butter. Peanut butter was a big one.
The first forbidden food. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. It's so funny, the fads too, because in the 80s and 90s, that's totally what it was, is low fat. That's,
Exactly. Exactly. So I remember looking at my mom's diet books to figure out the fat grams in certain foods and cutting out those ones. And so that's when I started to play around with it. And then, but there was still the cycle of, well, I went to my friend's house on the weekend and they had things like Twinkies and, Wonder Bread with Kraft singles. And I would just eat their pantry clean. That was did like, and I think that's, that's something young kids do anyways, just because it's fun basement and watch TV and munch on the food. But for me, it was like, all right, eat as much of this as you can, because when you go home, it's not going to be there anymore. And you're also trying to like cut out these, peanut butter and other peanut butter is the only one that's coming to my mind. But so reflecting back on it, I started to have this imperceptible, innocent restriction binge behavior that had been happening from a very young age. And then it became a little bit more of a dieting based behavior through high school. And high school is when I started to get more into exercise. So I started to try to run, or I tried to go on the treadmill at the gym. And I say tried because I was still terrible at it, and I still came in place all the time, and it's just never really, I was never naturally athletic at all. But it made me feel good because I was never good at gym class. So the idea of, being a little better at gym class or being slightly more athletic and losing weight was really exciting for me. So exercise was really my main form of restriction, if you want to call it that, more so than the food. And the food didn't accelerate more until later in university and then beyond that. In high school, it was just playing around a little bit with cutting out some of the fat, but exercise started to become a more important part of the equation there. And I would lose a little bit of weight and I would get validation. But everything I did, I tried to do to be cool. So I also had depression, and it was pretty bad. I had to stay home from school a lot. I hated life. I hated myself. I was suicidal. There was a period of my life that was pretty dark for a couple of years. And that certainly contributed a lot to the way that I felt about myself and my desire to want to feel better. And I tried to do that by trying to be cool. And so, like smoking, drinking, hanging out with guys, trying to lose weight, like basically do whatever I could to be accepted, to be deemed attractive, and trying to get that from males as well as my female classmates.
Yeah, because it is really depressing and hard when you don't feel accepted by your peers at that age. And I can totally see why all that stuff would become very appealing as, maybe this is the way to get that stuff.
Yes, exactly. That really was just that period of time where I wouldn't say anything was obsessive in terms of dieting or exercise. It was more just playing around with it, but still really, really hating my body, like really hating my body through that time and not feeling comfortable in who I was at all. And really just doing anything I could to try and be desired or liked, because that was just the way that I knew how to feel validated and that I knew how to feel better about myself.
Right. Did that stuff start to have negative consequences at that point, like the drinking and smoking and those things, or?
Well, I'll just be really honest. I had alcohol poisoning when I was like 14. So
yeah, big time negative consequence.
The negative consequences were more just, I hid it a lot from people. And so there weren't any severe negative consequences. That was probably the most significant one I honestly, I really learned my lesson. I actually didn't really drink for a few years after that because it was such a horrible experience. But the other consequences, not really significant, just, being punished by teachers or parental units when I was caught doing bad things.
I had a very similar experience actually at that phase of my life from about 13, 14 to like 15. I want to say, I guess probably 13 to 15 was like the heyday of my bad kid times. So
yes, me too.
And then I sort of shaped up on my own because I realized that I wasn't getting anywhere with that stuff. But
yes. Very similar experience. And that was a very dark time for me. So it was just, I just really didn't care about myself. I didn't care about life. So I didn't really care. Like I just did whatever I wanted to do. So it was very rebellious, but I was always able to pull it together and, still do well in school and things like that. It was just this other stuff happening beneath the surface.
Right. Right. And did you get treated for the depression at that point, or did you? Yeah.
Yes. It took them a couple of years to really figure out a combination of medications that worked for me. So through that 2-year period, it was really difficult. And then once we figured out a combination of medications that worked really well for me, I felt so much better. And so that I was on those for years as it just kind of stabilized my moods. And I felt like much more like a normal human being.
That's interesting. And then what happened in like university and beyond that sort of brought you back to the dieting? Because did the dieting sort of stay with you all throughout that time from high school into college, or?
Yeah, the exercise of it always sort of did. I would say in first year university, I didn't do anything actually. I pretty much lived on cheesy bread, grilled cheese sandwiches, rum and Coke, and I didn't exercise. I didn't step in the gym once. So that was kind of funny, like, because didn't really do anything about it then. But then in second or third year, that's when I started to ramp it up. I started to go to the gym. And then I would say in my last year of university was when it started to become more obsessive. Like I had to go to the gym every single day, and I had to, work out. Like even if I was exhausted, even if I hadn't slept, I would get up early. That's what I would do. And that was when I started to play around a little bit more with dieting as well. So cutting out certain foods. And so I would say that, how old would I have been then? Probably like 21 or 22. That's when I started to get really obsessed. And, after I graduated and was living on my own, it just continued this perpetual obsession with my weight, with trying to lose weight, with exercise. And then as a result, because I was exercising so much, I was eating these huge quantities of food and then hating myself for being so hungry all the time and hating myself for eating these huge quantities of food. And that went on for a few years. And then I found CrossFit. And then that's when my eating became more disordered. And that's when I started to really cut out entire food groups and really, I got into the quote unquote science of, yeah, exactly, which I'm excited to talk to you about later, but the science of paleo and the science justified all my behaviors. And so I was doing it to try and be lean, quote unquote, but it was healthy, like, no, protecting my gut health. Like, no, I'm reducing inflammation in my body. And that's when things started to spiral more significantly with food.
Yeah, it's interesting how that sort of goes under the guise of health and how it is really wrapped up with a CrossFit community. Like I have some clients who are in recovery from disordered eating, and I have to sort of constantly remind them, like, don't listen to what your CrossFit buddies say about eating. You can do the workouts, but don't go there.
For lack of a better way of saying it, it's super fucked up. There's a lot of really bad information out there. There's a lot of coaches enabling and doing damage to people. I don't think it's intentional. Like, obviously, I think that they truly believe that's what you want to do, but it's not smart at all, and it damages people. And I don't blame the people in my life who potentially enabled me, but certainly it fueled my fire. So, that was like 10 years ago, I think, when I started CrossFit. And I did it because a friend of mine was like, I want to go and do a boot camp. And they had a boot camp, which was an introductory CrossFit program. And so and I was like, boot camp, buzzword, this is 10 years ago. I was like, boot camp, I want to lose weight.
Right.
That's all I ever was trying to lose weight. And so I started it and immediately got hooked because it was such an intense workout. It was like nothing I'd ever kind of put myself through at a gym before. So I loved it. And then, at first when they started talking about paleo, I thought they were crazy because I was so into my low fat, soy hot whole wheat wrap with low fat Kraft single type meals. We pretty much lived on those for a long time. But anyways, they introduced us to paleo, and I was like, this is bullshit. Like, this is so stupid. These people don't know what they're talking about. And I rejected it for about a year. And my wedding was coming up, and I ended up really injuring myself. I ended up getting pneumonia and then injuring a muscle in my rib cage from coughing so much. So couldn't work out
Oh
for
my
the 2
God.
months leading up to my wedding. And so I was so obsessed with exercise. So this was really devastating for me. Like really anxiety inducing and panic inducing. And, there were tears at the dress fittings and whatnot. All I cared about was looking a certain way on my wedding day, which, looking back now is super unfortunate, but that was just my frame of mind at the time.
Oh yeah, and the whole wedding industrial complex really pushes you in that direction too. I know people who've gone in to get their dresses fitted for the first time and had the tailor be like, "So how much weight are you going to lose?" Like it's just routine,
It's just the diet culture is embedded with the wedding industry. It's insane. So that was when I asked my trainers, I was like, well, what can I do? And they were like, well, you can change the way that you eat. And so that was my first introduction into eating more of I guess what you would call like a paleo style of eating. And then I started to get into that culture and I really dove headfirst into that. And that became the story of my life for a few years. That was just it was my career. It was my obsession. Like it was a full-time job for me to be thinking about the macronutrients I was eating, my meal plan, what foods I was going to bring with me, what workouts I was going to do, and stepping on the scale just not relentlessly, obsessively, and just my moods being completely dictated by my weight, and how I felt about myself being dictated by my weight never being enough, and then my food and my quantity of workouts really dictating how I felt about myself as well.
That sounds really like narrow of a focus, like a narrow way.
It was. Yeah, it was very narrow. And I think, for me, it was just this way that I thought that I could control my destiny in life, my happiness in life, my success in life. Everything that was my control mechanism for it. And it was really just, my coping mechanism was weight fixation and dieting. That was a way for me to try and cope with emotions and control my emotions. And it was such a huge distraction. Like, you're just inside your own head the whole time.
Yeah. And getting so much reinforcement from the outside too.
Yes. Yes.
Everybody's telling you that's what you're supposed to do.
Yes. And it wasn't just about being thin anymore. Now it was about being like ripped and thin. And so, I had such major body dysmorphia. Like, so I really wish somebody could have come and like hit me in the head with a baseball bat, because I look at pictures of myself from back then and I'm like, that's not what I saw. Like not what I saw at all. And it's actually embarrassing for me to think about the way that I felt about myself and the way that I saw myself, because my head was messed up. But I thought everything I was doing was healthy. I didn't think I had a problem. I actually thought I really sucked at dieting, because even when I was eating paleo, I was still gorging on paleo foods all weekend long. I'd make like coconut bread out of coconut flour and bananas and stuff, and I would just eat the whole thing because I was starving during the week. And then
you needed some carbohydrates that were sorely lacking.
Yeah, it was this whole, as I said, that whole restrict and then eat everything on weekends was this behavior that had been ingrained in me from a very young age. And that just continued on and became more amplified. But then shame was attached to it. Guilt was attached to it. Failure was attached to it as I got older, because I was intentionally trying to restrict, and I could not figure out why I couldn't control myself on weekends. I was I was not a very good dieter. Like I couldn't make it last for very long,
right.
Which is probably a blessing, because my body was outsmarted me in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, like, that's the thing with most dieters, actually, is that eventually your body does outsmart you, and that's protective. Yes. And for those few people who don't have that happen, like, that's actually a genetic fluke, like if you don't have the sort of capacity, or if your body doesn't like kick you back into binge mode, usually that's because you have the gene for restrictive anorexia, and that's not good. You know, that's a very, very tiny segment of the population. And the vast majority of people have, you know, the way that we're supposed to be wired, which is like after a period of restriction, you're driven to binge.
Yeah. And as a result, over the course of 2 years, I would say, you know, my weight started to creep back up because I just couldn't restrict anymore. And I started to I just couldn't. Like, and even if I did, like, I remember the last thing I did was this like liquid cleanse for a week after I'd been to the Dominican for my best friend's wedding. And I gained a pound. What? Like, I was like, and that's when I was like, I'm broken. Like, and then I became obsessed with my metabolism is broken and I need to figure out what I can do to fix it. Like, what nutrient am I missing to fix my metabolism? And then that was like this whole other rabbit hole that I went down. And ultimately that led me to go to see a naturopath that was really the catalyst for me to reverse all of this and to see this from the outside perspective of you actually have a problem here. What you think is healthy is not. You're hurting yourself. You're harming yourself, and you need to change because, you know, you think you're the image of health, and you're not. You know, my hormones were totally disrupted, and that's when I realized that I had a problem. And that's when I realized that I needed to make over what was happening inside of my head and not my body. And that was a big wake up call moment for me. And that's when I started to loosen the reins of dieting and started to, you know, bring the fear of foods back in. And I started to eat more, and I had to take 6 months off of doing intense exercise, and that I had to, doctors and I wanted to follow that because I was like, you know what? I want my hormones to function properly. Now, in the back of my head, I was still like, because then I'll be able to actually lose weight. But
right, of course.
It was through that, because I think everybody goes into this thinking, well, if I intuitively eat, or I eat what I want, then I'll actually be able to lose weight. Like that.
Oh yeah. That's always the back of the mind somewhere, right?
But then, you know, through that process, and I really started to work on my body acceptance and my body image and my self-worth and the issues that I had with perfectionism and all of that. You know, I did like a lot of deep inner work and really figured out who I was, because I don't think I ever had an identity. My identity was always just this thing that I kind of created based on what I thought would be the most admired externally. I was a chameleon to whatever I thought my external environment would like. And that was, you know, when I was at work, I was this one person. When I was in the gym, I was a different person. Like, you know, I was able to just like change who I was in order to be liked. And so you know, in my early 30s, that's when I had to like actually sit down and be like, who am I? You know, what do I really value? You know, what is my voice? What are my beliefs? And I did a ton of, you know, work to really figure out authentically who I am and start to own that. And what was so cool about that is that the body hate disappeared as a result of that. You know, when I started to figure out who I was and stand in my truth and show up as who I was and stop caring about other people's judgments and whether or not people like me and whether or not people find me attractive, the body hate just organically started to disappear. And, you know what, like today, I don't think about my body anymore. You know, my weight I had to gain weight, and then and now it's just kind of stabilized. And to be honest, I could give a shit what it is. Like, I just don't care about my body. Like, there's just so many more interesting things in my life as in who I am, that I just don't care about it anymore. I care about, you know, how it feels. I care about be respecting it. I care about appreciating what it can do. I care about taking care of it in a way that, like, for example, resting it when it needs to be rested, moving it when it needs to be moved. But I don't care about the way that it looks, you know, like, yeah.
Yeah.
I like to get my hair done. Like I like to, wear certain clothes, whatever. But I do that for me, not because of how I will want anyone else to perceive me. And that is just so freeing. It's incredible. And then, like for food is just food now. It's truly this neutral thing that I don't really think is that interesting anymore. It's just there. I love food. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm definitely the first one to hit the dessert tray with you. I'll be the first one at the buffet. Like, can't take the Italian out of me. Like, I love food. I'll eat it. Like, it's wonderful. But I don't give it any thought aside from, hey, like, what are we whipping up for dinner tonight? Or, ooh, I really feel like a piece of chocolate banana cream pie. Like, let's go and get that, Or cherries are in season. Oh my God, let's eat them because they're fresh in season right now and they taste so good. Like just that's how I think about food. And there's zero connection to the way I feel about myself. There's zero connection to weight manipulation. And that's awesome. Like it feels great.
That's incredible because that is like truly intuitive eating, like eating for pleasure and satisfaction and, thinking about how something is going to fuel you or make you feel, but also what kind of pleasure it's going to give you. And then not thinking about it when you don't have to.
Yes.
Right? Like not being obsessed with it all day long.
Yes.
Because I certainly have that experience too, where like when I was in my eating disordered phase, I was thinking about food nonstop. It's all I wanted to do. And I wrote about food for a living, so I could totally get away with that.
Yes.
And it's like, and you were a nutritionist also, right? We should talk about that too, like your career trajectory and all of this.
Yes. So similar to you, I was so obsessed with it that I wanted to make that my career. I was so obsessed with losing weight that I wanted to help other people lose weight.
Right.
And so, I went back to school to be a nutritionist. And then, I did that for a couple of years and I was specifically helping women with weight loss, which I hate that I did that. I feel bad for the people that I enabled in that way. I feel bad that my disordered frame of mind impacted other people in a way that was negative, but I also didn't know what I didn't know.
Right, exactly.
I really didn't know what I didn't know. And so I, through the course of my own transformation, that's when I was introduced to health at every size. And that's when I really, left that whole paleo community and, albeit I still have friends who are, bloggers or whatever, but I like them for who they are, not for, their food beliefs. And the people I socialize with tend to do it in a very non-dogmatic way. But there was just certain things that I was just like, I thought that I couldn't eat certain foods. And then when I actually ate them, I was like, oh, actually, I think that was all in my head. Like it was just this major placebo effect that was happening.
Yep.
And now I don't, like that, I don't believe in a certain way of eating. I just, I believe in eating the things that make you feel good. And I believe that our bodies are capable of telling us what those things are when we really just shut out the noise and empower ourselves to trust our own biology.
Yes.
Natural.
Absolutely. That's amazing. I love that you found health at every size and it really clicked for you because it sounds like at a certain point you were ready for that change. Like you were done with dieting or there was something that wasn't working for you.
Yeah, I was done with feeling shitty. Like I was like, how much? This is how everything goes down in my life. I do something for like 18 years and like in a way that is not helpful to me. And then I have this kind of wake up call moment and I make a radical change. Like that's happened to me in different ways, like I was living in a place, like I'd been wanting to live near mountains and ocean for 18 years and never doing anything about it. And then, I hit a certain age where I was like, what am I doing? Like, am I going to spend another 18 years thinking about this? Like, we got to go and we move.
It's amazing.
I spent like years complaining about working in a corporate world and always wanting to work for myself. And then one day I was just like, how much longer are you going to sit here and complain about it? Like go do something about it.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with my body. It's just like, am I just going to sit here and hate my body or am I going to do something about it? So sometimes I'm a slow learner. It takes me a while to realize.
Right. You got to stew in that sort of discomfort for a
That's
long
why I
time.
have coaches that help me now, because I need someone to like shake me from the outside perspective and be like, listen, like, are you going to sit here and complain about this? Or are you actually going to go and do something about it? So yeah.
I mean, amazing that you figured it out, you know, because I think some people spend their whole lives wishing things were different and not doing anything about it. So
Yes. I'm
Yeah.
lucky that I had such a pivotal experience that really shook the ground underneath me, that caused me to have to make a radical change, because I would have resisted it for as long as I could, because I was so focused on this one piece. Like, and it was because I hadn't obtained this body that I desired. That was all I cared about, which is extremely, when I'm just talking about this, I'm like, I cringe with how superficial that sounds, but that's how, and not that I judge other people that think that way, but just, you know, having being on the other side now, I just realize how much more there is to living.
Right. Yeah. It's sad that we spend so much time thinking that. And I completely relate to that.
Yeah. And it's our culture. It's just every magazine you pick up, every time you go on the internet, it's just, that's the celebration. Like that's the, oh my God, you're an exceptional human being because your body, like, oh, look at her body. Like, oh my,
Right.
she's so great. And it's like, what? Like, what are we doing? You know?
Yeah.
There's these
Exactly.
There's these incredible women in the world who are fighting for civil rights, who are doing these amazing things to change our culture in such a more impactful, positive way. And all we give a shit about is Kim Kardashian's post-baby body. Like,
right.
Fuck no, you know? Like, I just can't even with it. But that's our culture, and that's what if you're exposed to that, of course you're going to internalize that and think that that's that's what you need to do to be exceptional. And I just want women to know, I want people to know that there is another side of it, and that the other side of it is beautiful and empowering and free, and that it's worth, you know, the year or two of struggle and ups and downs and ugliness and messiness of the journey to get there. It really is.
I totally agree. And that's such a beautiful way of putting it. Like it's a fraction of your life. It's maybe a few years that you're struggling and it sucks and it's hard. And there's a lot of dark moments in that journey. But I mean, when you get to the other side, it's amazing how little many of those things matter anymore.
Yeah, but you're already in a dark place. Like you're already struggling. It's just that your struggle is so normalized that you don't, that it's not really seen as for what it is until you go and you look back on it. That's what I
too. Yeah, I fully agree with that.
Yeah, like it seems, and the unknown seems so scary, like making that leap to say, all right, I'm going to stop intentionally trying to lose weight. I'm just going to let my body do what it's going to do. I'm going to leave dieting behind. There's so much fear around that unknown because nobody's talking about that because, you know?
Right. Or if they are, they're talking about it in a really negative way. Like she's really let herself go, you know, it's letting go. Like letting go has such a positive connotation now that I'm on the other side of it and feel so free. And like I let go of this heavy burden I was carrying. But I think when I was in it, letting go of the struggle and of the fight to change my body felt like giving up, giving in, you know, all these things that have such a negative connotation and it's made out to be so negative in our culture.
Exactly. And so it's you know, I love the body positive movement, but it's still so counterculture and it's still so small. And I think, you know, I'm sure you can relate to this, is that you probably think that it's everywhere. Like I think it's everywhere because I, you know, that's what I live in. I live in a body positive culture. But then I go out into, you know, the normal world and I'm like, whoa, like, no, you know, like,
yeah,
it's still pretty ugly out there. And I don't read a lot of popular culture magazines anymore, but recently my mother-in-law was here and she picks them up like just for fun. So I had like 3 of these magazines and I was looking through them and I couldn't believe, just the amount of messaging that just subconsciously and blatantly says you're not good enough. As a woman, you're not good enough. As a woman, you're being judged based on your appearance. As a woman, you need to measure up. And you need to compare yourself to other people because that's what other people are doing to you. And that's what we're absorbing consciously or unconsciously. And it's no wonder that it's so hard to break free of that. And it's no wonder those fears are so deeply embedded, that fear of rejection, that fear of being judged, this need to measure up, this obsession over comparing ourselves with other people. It's no wonder that we have that. That's, as women, that's how we've been trained for our survival. That's socially, like that's the way that we've adapted. That's our survival mechanism, and it's, and so that's why it is innate. Like it's something that is very deep inside your psyche that, and part of us always wants to avoid emotional harm, obviously, which is a great thing to have, is to have this internal mechanism that wants to avoid emotional harm. But the way that we've internalized that is through wanting to, manipulate our bodies and to be attractive. That's our way to kind of protect ourselves. And so it's crazy. Like if you think back into, caveman days or whatever, like women were like, in order to survive, we had to be accepted, right? Like, cause like 100 years ago, we weren't empowered enough. Like women weren't independent. So our likability, like our survival was dependent on being likable. And the way and we were bred to do that was through our attractiveness. And so it's really interesting to kind of understand like that, the instinctual side of the equation as to why we do the things that we do and why we do desire to manipulate our bodies.
Right, exactly. And the sort of psychological patriarchy that's inherent in that.
Yes.
Right? Like that's like a buzzword that I've recently come to really embrace because I feel like it explains so much of what goes on in our own minds as women and also in the relationships with men in talking about feelings or bodies or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
there's this way that patriarchy is so embedded in how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And I quote this book a lot on the podcast, but The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, makes the really germane point that, this was written in the 90s, but it's just gotten worse now, I think. Her point is like when women historically got the most power that they've really ever had through the millennia in Western culture was when like Twiggy came on the scene.
Yes.
And suddenly the body image ideal was significantly thinner than most women could ever achieve, than the vast majority of women could ever achieve naturally. And so suddenly the diet culture ramped into high gear and people were pressured to always be striving to be thinner than they actually were, which, took away a lot of women's brain power and ability to affect change and ability to really use this newfound power in society to do stuff. It was like, the potent political sedative.
Yes. It's like, here, okay, women are independent now, but you're not.
Right. You're not. Because your body's messed up and you got to fix it.
You to be a prisoner of this system that inherently takes away your independence. Like it's it's fascinating to look at it from the feminist perspective. I think it's important to look at it from a feminist perspective. So
I agree.
Yeah, it's crazy. We could talk about that forever.
Oh my God. I know.
It excites me.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I think it helps people really understand where this is coming from, because I know for myself, when I was in it and I was fighting my body and hating myself, there was a part of me that was like, ugh, you're so stupid for thinking this way, for having these struggles. There are bigger, more important things in the world to be thinking about. You're too smart for this. That was the sort of critic's voice in my head and just making me feel worse about what I was already feeling bad about.
Right.
When in reality, like, of course I was feeling that way. That is the culture we're all steeped in. That's a message that we're given from birth in subtle forms and not so subtle forms. Like, of course it would be a huge deal to me what my body looked like.
Yeah.
And sometimes that would outweigh, a direction I wanted to go in my career or my relationships or whatever it may be, and I knew that my values were getting skewed, but also, of course, they were skewed because at the end of the day, we're all being pressured to, change our bodies in order to be accepted. So, of course, that's a big value as well. So I think when I was able to reframe it and understand like where that was coming from and that I wasn't crazy or a freak or, a bad person for having these thoughts, that I was just in this culture that we all live in, and how fucked up is that we all have this pressure on us to constantly want to change our bodies. It was very liberating. It's like it kind of drop that second arrow at least of like, oh, I'm also bad for having these feelings, and more just kind of reflect on, okay, I'm feeling bad about my body right now. Like, what does that mean? What am I actually worried about here?
Yeah, and like, says who, like, so like, where is this actually coming from? Like, what, if you woke up in a world where all bodies, where the philosophy was all bodies are good bodies, like, what would actually be going on? Like, what would you do differently? And I think that that's always a really fascinating question. That's one that I always throw to my clients in a coaching environment is, like, well, if your body size didn't matter, like, what would you do differently? And it's amazing when you really bring light to how much it dictates your actions and how much it dictates your behaviors.
Totally. That's such a great question too, because it also gets at, what's being masked by this pursuit of body perfection. Like, what feelings are you using that to try to escape from or try to manage in some way, right? And then you can actually, if we did live in a culture where body size didn't matter, maybe it would be so much easier to address the feelings that were at the root. But because we have this convenient scapegoat or distraction, where we can just always like kick the can down the road of, well, I'm going to change this about my life when my body size is where I want it to be, or, when I'm thin enough, I will do this.
I call it emotional weight fixation, or like, and like emotional dieting, like so many people talk about emotional eating, but I'm like, I think the bigger thing is actually emotional weight fixation and emotional dieting. And that that's like, those are like two of the most widely accepted coping mechanisms in our society. And people don't realize how they are turning to those things to, like you said, mask feelings or try to alter our feelings or our experiences. And it's so interesting to me that, when you look at where the source of the negativity that you're inflicting on yourself, that a lot of the times it's not really about your body, it's about other things happening that we fixate on our weight as a way to distract ourselves from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's such a good exercise to try, just to be like, okay, I'm extra obsessed with my body right now. What's actually going on? What other stressors have I had in my life that are making me kind of turn to body and weight as a coping mechanism?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And emotional eating, I feel like that's what gets a lot of people in the door for nutrition counseling or intuitive eating or, whatever. But it's actually, I've like been very reluctant to even use that term on my website or be associated with it at all, even though I know it sort of brings people in the door.
It's what people are Googling, right? So
exactly.
I know.
But it's sort of made up. I feel like it's kind of a made up term by the diet industry, actually, that, says like, oh, this is why you're failing at the diet. The diet's not failing you. You're just eating emotionally. And if you can get your emotional eating under control, you'll be able to follow this diet and you'll be just fine, And that's exactly what I thought when I was in my disordered eating days, because I had a very similar like binge, restrict, overexercise cycle. And I was always like, oh, these emotional eating episodes are just derailing me. And if I could just figure them out and get them under control, that's like the first way that I knew I even had an eating disorder, is because I was binging so much. And I was like, well, the binges are the problem. But I refused to look at everything else that was playing into that cycle.
Well, because that would be such a horrible thing to have to come to terms with when you're so, right? Like, and you don't realize that that's actually the issue. So, yes.
You're not ready to give it up. You're not ready to give up all the other stuff that you're pursuing, but you just want to get rid of those emotional eating episodes or those binges.
Yes, yes, totally.
So, yeah. Oh, I could talk to you all day, but we also are about to record your podcast, so I want to make sure we don't go crazy long. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about your program and where people can find you online?
Sure. So you can find me at summerinnanen.com, or if you just go to thebodyimagecoach.com, that'll redirect you to my site. I'm a professionally trained coach that specializes in body image, self-worth, and confidence. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about in the back part of this episode is my jam. It's what I love to do. I've got a lot of free resources. The big thing coming up for me is on September 7th, I'm going to be I have a free mini course. It's called Rock Your Body, and it's about helping women to stop living behind the number on their scale. And that will then open up to, if women want to continue on, there's a paid 3-month coaching program with me, which is really getting to the layers underneath the body hate. So ultimately, at the end of it, like, want you to say, I don't hate my body anymore. And that's the women who came out of the program in the spring have been saying. They actually, most of them said it was life-changing. So that's been really cool. But it's really getting to, helping you overcome your fear, help you to stop comparing yourself to other women, to help you to not care what other people think. And that's a huge one for me. And then figuring out who you are, like, now that you're not obsessed with your weight or obsessed with food or fitness, who are you under the surface? And that's really where my coaching training and all the stuff I've done there really comes into play and fits nicely with the work that I do with body image. So to get information on that, you're going to have that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I will put a link in the show notes so that people can find you.
Yeah. And that will be also, you'll be able to find that via my website too, which is, again, like, if you just go to thebodyimagecoach.com. I also have a podcast called Fearless Rebel Radio, which is a body positive podcast dedicated to empowering women to live life on their own terms. I have a book on Amazon. It's called Body Image Remix, Embrace Your Body and Unleash the Fierce, Confident Woman Within. That's a really good introductory to my perspective and my approach to body image as well. It's got my story woven throughout there. So it's a short read. You can blaze through it in a couple of hours, but it's a good kind of Kickstarter to set a foundation for a more positive body image.
I love it. And I love your work. And I'm so happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been
Yay.
Cool. I'm glad we were able to finally hook this up.
I know, me too. It's been months in the coming. So glad to finally be able to share it. Thanks, Summer.
Thanks, Christy.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to our guest for being here and to you guys for listening. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with another brand new episode. So be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Android or whatever your favorite podcast app is if you haven't done so already. Meanwhile, I'd love to stay in touch with you online. The best way is by email. So if you join my email VIP list, you'll get exclusive tips about intuitive eating and body positivity and updates about all my work, as well as new episodes of the podcast. So if you go to christyharrison.com/email, you can sign up there. That's christyharrison.com/email. And I would love to have you guys all on my VIP list. And then you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We're at Food Psych on Facebook and Food Psych Pod on Twitter. I am also on Instagram, just me this time. I don't have a separate account for the podcast, but I'm on Instagram at Christy Harrison, and the first I is a 1. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever went